Conference realignment has made the SEC and the Big Ten the big evil villains of college football. The Big Ten ultimately was responsible for the death of the Pac-12, and the SEC took away Texas and Oklahoma from the Big 12, which pretty much put that conference on life support. And I believe over the span of 2-3 years from now, we will see the formation of college football Super League, where you have the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC, all combining to make college football Super League, which would be the equivalent to the AFC, NFC, and the NFL. And a lot of people don't like the current state that college football is in, and they blame the SEC and the Big 10 for college football being the way that it is right now. But I disagree with that. I don't put the blame solely on the SEC and the Big 10 for making college football what it is at the moment. I feel a particular network is responsible for the mess that college sports is, which is the Longhorn Network. And if you guys don't remember what the Longhorn Network is, it was originally created back in 2011. It was a network solely dedicated to covering and broadcasting Texas sports. They broadcasted a few football, basketball games, a couple of their winter and Olympic sports. And at the time, the Longhorn Network was created because Big 12 members couldn't come to an agreement on a conference network. You know how we currently have the SEC network, the ACC network, the Big 10 network. Well, the Big 12 members at the time were unable to agree on making one. And the way they did their media rights deal is a lot different from how media rights deals are done today. Today, media rights deal, you normally see conferences distribute the revenue equally among their teams. Well, the way the Big 12 did is that not everybody got the same slice of the pie. You see, they would do their media rights deal in tiers. Their tier 1, they would sell off their high-profile games, like your big rivalries such as OU versus Texas. You would sell those off to the big networks like CBS, ESPN, Fox. And then you'll have your tier 2 games, which would be your games that have a less national appeal compared to your high-profile Big 12 games, such as if Texas Tech played Baylor, that would be a tier 2 game. And those games will be sold to your regional networks, such as the CW. You know how sometimes you'll see an ACC game on the CW 17? That would count as a tier 2 game. And occasionally you will see these games also on ESPNU, ESPN2, and then you'll have your third tier, which was your low-profile games. Like if Texas played Bishop Sycamore, that would be a tier 3 game. And what the Big 12 did at the time with their media rights deal is that they would sell off the tier 1 and tier 2 games, but the tier 3 games, they would allow every team to individually sell them off with whoever to get additional revenue for themselves. They didn't have to share this with the rest of the conference. And with Texas being the big brand that they were at the time, they were able to get a more favorable tier 3 deal than what any other team in the conference was capable of, due to them being a national contender at the time, the biggest brand in the sport at the moment. And ESPN, through a 20-year deal worth $300 million at Texas to acquire their tier 3 rights. And at the time, this was a very lucrative deal. It was paying Texas $15 million per season. And the reason why ESPN threw so much money at Texas for the Longhorn Network was mainly due to not wanting to see the Longhorns leave the Big 12 for the Pac-10, the Pac-12 at the time. Because at that moment, back in 2011, Fox had the media rights deal with the Pac-12. And you will lose the biggest brand in college football to where you had USC, Oregon, and a bunch of other big West Coast brands at the time to your biggest competitor. And ESPN didn't want that to happen. So they gave Texas an offer that they couldn't refuse. And of course, Texas would have been stupid not to take it. Plus, Texas and Oklahoma were the king and prince of the Big 12. They ran this conference. There wouldn't be no Big 12 without these two teams. So, to keep Texas happy and to further keep them from leaving the Big 12, they say, you know what? You want the Longhorn Network? We will allow you to have it, even though the other teams in the Big 12 at the time were against the Longhorn Network for several reasons that we will get into. And why the Longhorn Network pissed off a lot of members of the Big 12 is because it showed favoritism to Texas, and plus it further showed the instability of what the Big 12 was because of how unevenly distributed the television media rights deal were. You see, at the time, you know, they didn't really have even distribution when it came to their media rights deal, like how we have now with the SEC. Every SEC team gets the same even amount, even if you're Vanderbilt. Same thing with the Big 10, now the Big 12. But at that time, when you had the four big members of the Big 12 come together, they all agreed on this distribution model, and they agreed that Texas and OU will get the most of the revenue share. But eventually, over time, people grew to not like this, and that's when you saw Nebraska and Colorado leave. Now, they didn't leave because of Longhorn Network. They were already out the door a long time before the Longhorn Network took place. They were already looking to get out. But the Longhorn Network is the main reason why Texas A&M and Missouri did from the Big 12 to join the SEC. A&M didn't like the fact that their biggest rival had more exposure than what they did, and also they were getting a larger slice of the pie than what they were. And not only did this piss off A&M and Missouri, but it also hurt the rest of this conference ability to get a respectable media rights deal with Texas commanding so much of the pie. And not only did it hurt the Big 12 having the Longhorn Network when it came to negotiating a media rights deal that would appease all of its members, but they struggled to expand and add more members. Because why would you want to join a conference that's so unstable, that has an unfair pay model where you have one team getting more than the other? Nobody would want to join a conference in that situation unless you were a really high-level G5 at the time, which is what allowed them to add TCU and West Virginia. But because of the Longhorn Network, the Big 12 didn't really benefit from this. Texas got all of the benefits from it. Everybody else kind of suffered from it because they weren't able to get more money. Now, you can say, well, JT, everybody had the ability to sell their Tier 3 rights. That is true, but not everybody is willing to pay the same price for your Tier 3 rights as what they were with Texas. When you're just such a big brand like that, of course, ESPN and other networks are going to want to throw more money at it. So therefore, when the Pac-12 had the ability to add both Texas and Oklahoma, they turned it down because initially USC's athletic director, or their president at the time, in front of the cameras, he seemed like he was all for adding both Texas and OU. But behind the scenes, he didn't give them the vote for the move to take place. And the Pac-12 commissioner, Larry Scott, at that moment, didn't really want to add them because the Longhorn Network would have interfered with the Pac-12 trying to build their regional networks. They wanted to have a few networks of their own for different regions to broadcast their sporting events. And adding Texas also would have meant that they would have had to get a bigger slice of the pie because it's Texas, damn it. You know what they say about Texas. Everything is bigger in Texas. So therefore, Texas being the powerhouse that they are, they had so much pull that if they joined your conference, you kind of had to eat your ego and get them a larger slice of the pie because of what they were bringing in. And also, it would have been a domino effect. You get Texas, you get Oklahoma. You also would have gotten Oklahoma State and Texas Tech, who would have followed suit. And that essentially would have killed the Big 12. And if the Pac-12 would have allowed Texas to have the Longhorn Network, it would have made the Pac-12 the first big super conference of college football at that time. Now, would they have been as big as what the SEC is? Maybe. Washington has a pretty big fan base. Oregon does as well. You got USC. We know what they bring to the table. You had Texas and Oklahoma alongside of that. You know, the other schools that followed, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, they just would have been added meat to the bones. That would have helped keep the Pac-12 alive. But since Texas had the Longhorn Network, the Pac-12 was just like, nah, we're good off that. And since they didn't add them, eventually down the road, when Texas and OU did from the Big 12 to the SEC, that essentially was the domino effect that led to the downfall of the Pac-12. Because, you know, when one team goes on the attack, you have to react. And with the SEC adding OU and Texas, the Big Ten had to make some conference realignment moves in their own right, which included poaching USC, UCLA, UW, and Oregon from the Pac-12. And USC was to the Pac-12 what Texas was to the Big 12 at the time. They were the heart and soul of that conference. When you lose USC, you pretty much lost the entirety of the Pac-12, and that ultimately is what happened. And this is the domino effect from the Longhorn Network. But not only did the Longhorn Network hurt the Pac-12 in the sense of they didn't want to add them because of it, but it also hurt the Big 12. Because when you lost Texas and Oklahoma, instead of you being able to retroactively add teams, which a lot of members were saying, hey, like, this network isn't good for the conference, it's holding us back from adding more teams. So because of that, it held back how good you could have been, and the Big 12 could have been in a more advantageous situation now than what they were when they lost Oklahoma and Texas if the Longhorn Network was never created. So you see the uneven distribution of money from the Longhorn Network and how the Big 12 did their media rights deal was a large reason why all the teams in this conference were so unhappy and why you saw so many teams leaving. But if you didn't have it, or if the Pac-12 was willing to find a way to just make do with it, what the Pac-12 could have done is they get Texas, they get the Longhorn Network. Yeah, there would have been some legalities that they had to solve between ESPN and whatnot, but they could have turned the Longhorn Network into one of their regional Pac-12 networks. And ultimately, not adding Texas and Oklahoma because of this network is what led to its collapse, because you couldn't make the first super conference. And once you had OU and Texas leave, why would OU and Texas leave when the network was so profitable for Texas, JT? Well, although the Longhorn Network benefited Texas, the SEC just had way too much money on the table for Texas to turn down. That's why you now see the Longhorn Network defunct. And the Big Ten, by poaching the top four teams out of the Pac-12 and the remainder of that, leaving for the Big 12, they got the scraps, and the ACC got the crumbs. The Pac-12 is in the position that it's in today. So essentially, it's not the Big Ten and the SEC solely, poaching teams from other conferences that got college football into this state. It's the Longhorn Network. So essentially, you can say that the Longhorn Network broke college football, because it did. And I know you Texas fans are going to feel like this is a sly on you. I'm not hating on you. This is really just my opinion. I feel the Longhorn Network only benefited Texas, and it put the rest of the conference at a disadvantage. And it hurt the Pac-12, because if they didn't have the Longhorn Network, the Pac-12 for Larry Scott more than likely would have took Texas and OU, and the Pac-12 would have never collapsed because the media rights deal would have been good enough to appease everybody to where Texas and Oklahoma never felt the need to leave for more money and join the SEC. The SEC wouldn't have the monopoly over the sport that it has right now. The Big Ten would still have been the second most powerful conference, but they wouldn't have had the superpower of a team and a school as storied with the history that USC has. So this is why I believe the Longhorn Network broke college football. I'm eager to know you guys' thoughts on this down in the comment section down below.